at democracy, our democracy, before we were talking about it, and someone had come on the television and said that Egypt, they felt, and it was just their opinion, they felt that Egypt would benefit from a parliamentary democracy, which right away in my mind makes me think of England.
Yes.
So my first question to you and your research when you came through was, the United States has a
constitutional republic.
Constitutional republic.
Yeah.
Remind us what that intention is.
We pledge allegiance to the United States and to the democracy for which it stands.
No, the republic for which it stands.
The republic, yes. So that's the form of government we have. However, every time you turn on TV, they talk about our democracy and spreading democracy to the rest of the world. Although the founders didn't believe in pure democracy because that's mob rule. A lynch mob is pure democracy. You know? So we have a representative republic.
Right.
There are certain things that it would be difficult to do as a people. For instance, if you lived in the Midwest, how would you maintain a navy?
Right.
So you could delegate that authority to the government.
Right.
The government cannot do anything that we as individuals can't do. We have that right, and certain things we take upon ourselves for the states to do.
Right.
And then other things we delegate to the federal government.
Right.
But the Constitution is really a document of limitations, and it lays out about 18 or 16 or 18 things that the government can do.
Right.
Yes.
So when Egypt is looking, or any other country is looking to, could be Tunisia, could be Egypt, hopefully it would be Libya, you know, all these countries, when they are looking to have democracy, I think the ordinary person is saying it's rights, freedom of press, social justice, individual freedom, individual rights, to have property, to have a say in taxation, to vote. But when you, as you studied our Constitution and you look in the news and you see this awakening, you know, this kind of power shift to the people, let's just say to the people.
Yes.
So we kind of started from scratch. You know, these people are starting from scratch, but they have cultural and religious things. We had that too. As well, but they still have that kind of vacuum first,
yes,
and then build government second.
Yes.
So would there be something maybe that they would put in their Constitution that we maybe didn't? Well, you know, like how to redress, like for, you know, I don't know if this even applies, but the legislators left the state of Wisconsin so that they couldn't have a quorum to vote. Is that constitutional?
Of course not.
You know, we're all scratching our heads in the kitchen table going...
If you were hired for a job and you decided not to show up,
right,
you'd get fired.
Right. Yeah, I would. You're right.
That's their job is to show up.
Right, and to work out some kind of compromise. But I'm not trying to take a side either way. I'm just saying, so when other countries are looking at doing their Constitution, would it not behoove them to kind of think, you know, maybe in writing our Constitution, of course they're going to look at other countries and what they do, would there be like safeguards that they could put in that maybe we didn't?
I think so. Because our Constitution lays out the plan for government.
Yeah.
It's probably the most perfect plan yet devised by man, although the founders acknowledged that it might not be perfect, and they put in provisions that would allow it to be modified through the amendment process.
Right.
But it takes a supermajority to do that. It's amendments that were made after the Bill of Rights, some of which shouldn't have occurred, that were a detriment. One was prohibition, having the people directly elect senators, that then politicized it so that whoever could contribute the most to their campaign, which is usually not an individual person, but a corporation, that kind of person. And so the problem with the Constitution that they might want to address, because ours, they could do, I don't think they could do any better than by adopting our Constitution. But the Constitution is just a piece of paper. It can't defend itself. It's up to we the people to defend it. And there is a provision in there in the First Amendment for the right to a redress of grievances. You can petition the government with your grievances.
Right.
But suppose the government ignores the petition the way the King of England did.
Uh-huh.
Well, then we have the Second Amendment, which is the right to bear arms. And that was not put in there so people could go hunting. It was assumed that everyone had a rifle to go hunting with in colonial times. It was even a requirement in certain communities to bring your gun to church to defend you against Indians that might be you might be at war with at the time. And so it was really put in for the militia.
Right.
But the militia is not the National Guard, it's not the Army, it's not the state police. The militia was defined as every able-bodied male. He was over the age of 17 and I went up to, I think, 45. They were the militia. And the idea was to protect us from the government taking over and forming a dictatorship. But instead of having one dictator in Washington, you had 500 or so in Congress, you know. Well, it's like 500 kings instead of one king. What's worse? Right?
That's also a it's a strong deterrent, but it also can lead to being a violent deterrent. Other than perhaps another peaceful deterrent that could be written in that would say if in other words, if we get to that point where the government has become very large and is ignoring or is allowing interests through corporations, greed, whatever, there would be another type of recourse.
Well, there is. There is a means without resorting to arms by which we, the people, can put the government back in the position that it's supposed to be of limited authority. And that's, we had just talked about, is jury nullification.
I mean, we could just not vote, I guess.
Sure, Well, not
vote for no one.
But not voting is voting.
That's true, but if you don't vote for anybody, there would be nobody there.
Well, I think there should be an amendment saying that all the ballots should also include none of the above, because he would probably, so you'd have your different parties, your candidate for Republican or Democrat or other, Libertarian, for instance, Tea Party, whatever it might be, and then other, and then none of the above. And I have a feeling that oftentimes none of the above could win by a landslide.
But then there would be nobody serving that seat.
Yes.
Well, it would save some money.
Yeah. A lot of benefits that congressmen and senators get that we don't get.
Yes, they do. And I still wonder why.
But I think there's one that should be added to the list, and that's membership in a really nice country club. And they should be allowed, instead of going into session, to go to that club and play golf all day long, maybe hang out in the bar and have a few cocktails and stuff, and stop making all these laws.
that are based solely on self-interest?
Yes,
Is that kind of where
well, they always exempt themselves, It's,
they do, and that's interesting. Now, if there's nowhere it's written that they cannot exempt themselves.
It should be.
Well, maybe that's something that
would be
other
the next thing that should be a law.
Could look at and say, look, when we write it, we want to write it that they cannot exempt themselves from, they have to take a pay cut like everybody else. They don't get all these extra perks.
Well, it should be written. If they want to write another law, probably the best place to go is that Congress shall make no law that does not apply to itself, or any law that only applies to itself. Because, we have laws against discrimination in hiring. Congress is exempt. And now we are supposed to be the master. And the government is supposed to be the servant.
Right.
But since when would the servant have a better pension plan than the master?
So, these growing pains and these changes or deviations to the original format, I'm sure, is being studied. People know about these things. It's not like they're, they're hidden, and this is the first time anybody's ever heard of them. So it is my hope and my belief that when other countries are seeking to write their constitutions and
Yes.
expand their rights,
Yep.
that they will look at these as well and say,
Sure.
you know, this young country that's so successful,
Yes.
that has written this fabulous constitution and a Bill of Rights and laws, that, you know, their growing pains and their processes has led in different directions. I mean, who can know? Even the founding fathers were wise enough to know that it might be difficult to keep a republic, that it might be difficult to stem greed, individual greed over social justice, over a common good.
Well, I think we should offer our constitution to Egypt, and then they could, you know, expand upon it if they want, because it served us well for over 200 years, and we don't seem to be using it anymore. So.
Yes, we seem to allow it to be very sidetracked, it would appear. And I think over time that will change. I think the economy will force it to change to some extent, and I'm sorry to see that is forming as the driving factor.
Yes.
Because there are so many highly intelligent, compassionate people in America, you know, who have an entrepreneurial spirit that is just unbelievable, that built this country. And I know that they are saying to themselves, we can do better, there is better, and they're looking at our future and saying, where do we need to go? And it's going to be painful, no matter what you do.
Well, I think the world is never going to be the same, and that this thing in the Middle East will cascade through other countries.
Yeah.
Hopefully they'll come up with something that's a benefit to them. Most revolutions do not end like our American Revolution, which, because of the character of George Washington, who Hamilton wanted to make king, Washington said no. He said that we just fought this revolution to get rid of a king and to get rid of that system, and he had enough character to do that. Most men would not. I mean, if you say you can be king, well, it's good to be the king.
Yeah, it's good to be the king, yeah.
So we were very fortunate, and the odds, they study this in military schools like the Naval War College in Newport, and it's West Point. They lay out the strategies and everything. There's no way we should have won that. I mean, we were fighting we were a bunch of farmers. We're fighting the strongest military known to the world. They said that the sun never set on the British Empire. I mean, it was huge. They had this huge navy and trained professional soldiers, and we had a bunch of farmers, and yet we prevailed against all odds. Yeah. But most revolutions do not end that favorably. For instance, the Shah of Iran was deposed, and they got the Ayatollah Khomeini. Yeah. Something has to come in to fill the vacuum.
That's right, to fill the vacuum, and that's the instability.
The Russian Tsar was, his family were executed, and we got communism.
But maybe
Cuba had a revolution, and we got Fidel Castro and his communism. All these, and of course Egypt had King Farouk, and he was deposed, and it didn't get better. So.
Yeah. I think there are some benefits. Again, I see this global common coming through. Agree with it, disagree with it. I think it makes a lot of sense as far as how you look at the resources of the world and how we use them. Let's not get into politics. Let's just get into the reality of things. We need food. We need to feed people. We have energy concerns. You know, certain places have more oil than others, or a system set up. You don't change all those overnight. Everybody screams, let's go green. I have no problem going green, but you're not going to go green tomorrow because we consume much more than we take in. So until you start changing individuals, you know what I mean, and structures and building infrastructures to be based around that, you know, the idea is that you're looking for as much balance as you can get so that you don't become too codependent, and then you don't necessarily have to go out and smush everybody in order to control a particular natural resource. And, you know, and I see other countries starting to do that maybe in a different way. But I think some of the things that's changed is we had the Silk Road that came through that brought commerce throughout an entire region and changed and unified people, and of course I'm sure also started many wars because of that as well. But we have the internet, which is kind of like now the Silk Road of today.
Yes.
Because now
amazing, isn't it?
It is absolutely amazing. And I was just seeing a program on a particular empire. It was the Islamic Empire. PBS had done it. And it was very interesting because for them at that time, it was very tribal, and everything was through verbalization. Stories were passed down. And then, of course, everything became written, and then how that changed, and then how it was all burned as another empire came through. But I was struck by the Twitter, Facebook phenomenon, and what it means is that for us now, it's still verbal, but it's video. We can now see the world,
yes.
Okay, and it's much smaller, and we can make connections. So I don't see it as good or bad. It's a resource.
That's it. It's a tool.
It's a tool, and it should be a free tool.
People always have the power, whether it's a dictatorship, whether it's a kingdom, whether it's a despot, or the people always have the power. They don't always, most often, don't realize they have the power.
Yeah,
but
their ability to
it.
exercise it is extremely
demonstrated.
limited, right, through fear and
But
and
the
torture.
people always have the power to overthrow a bad government. Yeah. The only problem is sometimes in these demonstrations people get killed. Yeah. And nobody wants to be the ones that get killed. So that's one of the reasons why the Nazis were able to get the Jews to get on the cattle cars is they outnumbered their guards, but the guards were armed, and they knew that the first few were going to get shot.
That's right.
And no one wanted to be.
No one wanted to die.
No one wanted to volunteer for that.
That's right.
So
that's the survival instinct.
Yeah.
You know, no one wanted to die, and that hope that you could ride this out, and that the world would notice it, and it took the world quite.
Well, I noticed there's a song out, "Waiting for the World to Change."
Yes.
But which I thought was positive in that it shows that people aren't content with the status quo. But I thought, well, wait a minute, waiting for the world.
Yeah.
You shouldn't be waiting.
Yeah, you should be proactive.
You should be making the world change. Yeah. And the fact that information can travel at the speed of light.
Yeah, it's amazing.
I mean, 200 years ago, you had to put a letter on a ship and hope that it got to whatever,
That's right. That's right. Absolutely. You did. It is amazing, and the world continues to change, and we in America continue to address and readdress our economy, our government, and we should. Yeah. I think our founding fathers would have wanted us to.
Oh, I think so.
They wrote it so that we would have the ability to do that.
But it's fundamental to our government, and it's the bedrock on which it's built. And when a sports figure, for instance, say Tiger Woods, if his game goes off, right, what do these professionals do? They go back to practicing their basic stroke and stuff. They go back to the basics, and back to that foundation. And so we've slipped off track.
Yeah.
And when you write something down, if you were buying a piece of property, you'd have a deed, and it would be written down,
right,
where the boundaries were and stuff, so that later on somebody couldn't say, "Well, I thought they should be over here,"
Right.
Yeah. Well, that's why you write things down, and the Constitution was written, and it was written in everyday language, so anyone could understand it. Yeah. It wasn't written in legalese, and there was a method to change it if it was necessary. But these were the rules, and if you step away from the rules of the game, you're going to have problems.
Yeah, you create all these little sub-games,
Sure. Yeah.
I think.
And so now we have
happens.
the government engaged in things that it has no authority to be engaged in. Yeah. We have a Department of Education that hasn't educated a single person. We have the Department of Energy that hasn't produced a single gallon of oil. You know,
but it creates a lot of jobs.
Well, for government employees, which, by the way, make quite a bit more than the average person in the private sector.
Yes, and I've been reading the statistics, and it depends on, you know, and they had the thing with the union thing too, because that's going on with the union, and it, you know, in certain places,
sure.
if you have less of a degree, you make more money. If you have more of a degree, you make less money than the private sector, and again, it's all about balance.
Yes.
You know, do you create something for the simple fact of creating it, and then it just starts growing on itself? Should we really pay thousands of dollars for a toilet seat in the military?
Sure.
When, you know what I mean? When they could have a, you know, Walmart special at $4.99.
Right.
You know, made in China.
You know. There's a gentleman that was my mentor years ago from Auburn named Mr. Baker, and he's passed away now, but he was so knowledgeable in so many different subjects. And I asked him where he went to school. He went to school in a one-room schoolhouse in Carver, Massachusetts. And he got a fantastic education because they taught him how to study.
Yeah.
And it used to be at the turn of the century, to get into Princeton, you had to stand up with a book that was written in Latin and read out loud to a table where a bunch of professors were seated. You had to read out loud that Latin book in English. Now the colleges are happy if you just read. They have these, you know, all these remedial courses, you know.
Yeah. No, I think that there's a lot of good intentions that has come out over the decades that have actually reversed things in education, and it's the easiest thing to look at because you look at the kids,
sure,
and there you see it. Yeah. So, and I'm sure, and this is good. I'm glad that you came on.
Well, I'm glad I was here.
Yeah, I think this is a great.
It's always fun.
Thank you. It's a great conversation, and I hope that people will start to think about it, start to talk more about it, talk about it at home. I really hope people are sitting down and saying, you know, what is constitutional, what is not constitutional, but where do we see our future, and how do we see the things that connect us as opposed to the things that divide us? Because I think if we continue to look into the future and say, you know, what would we like the future of education to be? Where would we like our jobs to be? Because we don't have many jobs. You know, how do we balance out the corporate greed? How do we balance out the, you know, you can't stop a corporation from going to another country. It will eventually kind of even out, but it's going to take a long time. And in the meantime, we're suffering.
We shouldn't be paying for McDonald's to advertise in China.
Oh, isn't that just, that's just appalling. That is appalling.
Or for companies to relocate American jobs overseas.
Yeah, you know, thank heavens for C-SPAN, because I watched C-SPAN. You know, and I watched the committee talking about that. And the woman said, you know, and she said, you know, we as a committee should start making some decisions right now. Like, no more of this.
Well,
you know, paying for their advertising. They don't call it advertisements anymore. They call it access or some other fancy word, which doesn't mean much of anything. It means free money for them.
We're talking about the riots in Egypt. The government forces were throwing tear gas grenades, and the crowd was picking them up and attempting to throw them back. And on them it said, you know, "Made in USA." Well,
but that's just,
you can't get anything in this country that's made in the USA. How are they doing it?
Okay, and we'll leave with that. I won't go there. We'll leave with that. But anyway. Always a pleasure. Always a pleasure. Thank you so much. We'll have to have you back because there's just so much changing, so much happening. And these issues are not going to go away, thank heavens, because they need to be discussed and we need to make good, solid changes for every American citizen, for our global world, for our global economy. So keep talking, keep discussing. Thank you so much for watching. I'm Ramona, and you've been watching Ramona Interviews. Have a wonderful week.